So you're looking for,
Yeah, so I think we're gonna, recommend, at this point, I think we're at that stage of, what is the planning commission's recommendation to the council regarding the zoning of short-term rentals?
so in number 4, so an interim ordinance, they're looking at the ones that are non-compliant?
So what an interim ordinance would do would pretty much say the section of the zoning code that says short-term rentals are allowed in the 3 districts by interim use permit would essentially just say, we're not enforcing that from January 1 to December 31, we're not going to enforce it. And essentially anyone could do a short-term rental anywhere in the city. You still have to comply with the licensing requirements. And the purpose would be, again, to essentially study the impacts. Let's see does there become a problem? And then outside of any further action on January 1, 2024, that interim ordinance would expire and the existing ordinance goes back into effect. It doesn't go away, we just say we're ignoring it, we're just not enforcing it for 1 year. That's what number 4 does. Versus number 2, which just says we're going to delete that section from the ordinance entirely.
So in a nutshell, it would be, you're just going to let anybody do it for a year and just see what happens, basically? Is that?
Yep, they still have to comply with the licensing. Again, the cons with number 4, obviously the benefits of number 4 was we can see, would there be a problem? Cons of number 4 are, as Roger's talked about, kind of putting the cat back in the bag of a year from now, say the planning commission, the council decide, we didn't like this, we want to go back to how it was. Now we have to shut down, no, we won't renew those rental licenses, and we have to tell those people, we would tell them from the up front, from the get-go, by the way, this is for 1 year, but we would have to ensure that they stop operating after that point. So there is that defect, and there's the element of a year from now, we're going to be having this exact same conversation.
So in other words, we allow it and then they stop, and then you might get a bunch of people that are just going to continue to keep doing it.
But the people still might continue to keep doing it
Right
now that are flying under the radar that we have no idea about anyway.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Right.
Don't we have enough rental units in the Breezy already? In the zones that we have approved? Plus you do it 4 times a year.
Yep, and I would say in the zones that are approved, we have none. So of the 37 that are approved now, none that have been licensed by the county, not approved by the city, that have been licensed by the county, none of them are in a current approved zone for the city.
Correct.
So which kind of indicates there's no interest in putting one in one of those zones. Doesn't mean there won't be in the future, but currently there is not.
I'm guessing they're already all rented out. So.
Well, we wouldn't know about them then if they had their license right through the county.
Yeah, we would know
So
about
those
if they
people are flying under the radar and not compliant anyway, because they don't have a city license, even if they are in the correct zone.
Why are we not enforcing the ordinance we have?
Today?
Yeah, why are we allowing this to occur?
At this point, I think the direction kind of has been as we're having this conversation, let's have the conversation of have the determination what's the path moving forward before we start taking, we don't want to take action against the currently ones that exist if the intention is to allow them. So that's where it is. Let's get the definitive answer of are they allowed or are they not going to be allowed moving forward. And then once we have that answer, then we know, okay, this is the final answer. Now we're taking action. So that's kind of in the direction we've gotten from the council is let's get the definitive answer. And then from there moving forward, this is the response.
I had showed Jerry the October 13, 2020 meeting, and you also, David. We were talking short-term rentals back then, and because the county was coming out with their licensing, I suppose we should have been enforced at that time at the city, right?
I think at that time, the council was also considering whether to allow it or not, and they
Yeah.
really never got to that. They got to the position of they're going to allow it with a license. Now the
Right.
question is where they're going to allow it with a license.
Right.
Under today's rules, it's only allowed with well, and the license doesn't go into effect until January 1 of 2023. But under today's rules, it's only allowed in the commercial, the R4, and the
Correct.
resort commercial districts. Anything else, it's not allowed.
Right.
The question before you, or the recommendation they're seeking is, should we stay with the existing ordinance?
Right.
Or should the areas that it is allowed in be expanded? And if in fact the council so chooses to stay with the existing ordinance, then I think the clear direction is go out and enforce it with vigor.
Is there, we have a election coming up. I suppose there isn't something you could put on a ballot.
Not at this point.
No.
I mean, I don't think there's been any
I mean, we're
interest.
only 5 people and then the city council
Well,
is 5 people.
Your role is to make a recommendation.
Okay. I recommend number 1.
If you're putting that in a motion, Roger, I would second it.
Okay, I guess we have a motion for number 1 and a second. I guess all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
So
How did,
Did you-
Mr. Chair, did I hear something from you?
no, Ted.
How did you vote on that?
I'll go along with number 1.
We have a motion, so we have a motion, just want to confirm, so we had a motion to recommend to the city council to maintain and enforce the existing short-term rental zoning regulations. And then that was, in the vote there was 3 ayes and 1 nay. I just want to confirm that's what I heard.
Correct.
Okay. And that is the recommendation that will go before the city council in October.
Okay. Any other business?
I do have one item, Mr. Chair. At the end of your packet, the city council considered proposed ordinance, was that,
There is.
no, the other business is the next item.
Okay.
So the city council on at their September 6th meeting, considered proposed ordinance 2022-03, which was the Planning Commission's recommendations changes to the home occupation regulations. Upon consideration, the council did vote to table the item and send the ordinance back to the Planning Commission for revision. They pretty much had three main concerns with the ordinance as it was presented. That was, one was in the first section, that's pretty much the premise of the ordinance, or of home occupations, where it stated home occupations are intended to generate less than 16 trips per day, including deliveries and employees. They had some concern with that of really what they were looking at is they felt it was too loose. That really was no binding regulation. The Planning Commission, if they got an interim use permit for home occupation, could say 6 trips. They could say 30 trips, and the council felt that they would like the Planning Commission to consider placing a limit on the number of daily trips as a regulation and remove the current 16 daily trip clause from the purpose statement. So remove it from the purpose statement, and then consider putting a actual in the regulation saying no home occupation, regardless of what it is, shall exceed X number of trips. Obviously, the planning commission in that situation would still have the discretion to reduce less, but they could not authorize more than that number. Also with that, there was, it came up right before the council meeting, just a quick clarification I think we wanted from the planning commission too, as when it came to trips, was that 16 is that round trips, or was that 8 in, 8 out? So I think in any amendment there, what my request would be it would say the number of round trips. So, if you said 8 round trips, that's 8 vehicles in, 8 vehicles out. Just so it's clear in the ordinance what that means. The second item that they had concern about was the family member clause. As you remember, in your proposed ordinance, you struck the family member clause from subpart D to just say the number of employees shall be limited by the interim use permit. The council was not comfortable with that. They requested that either that section be put back in and it be maintained as it is, or similar to the number 1, have a hard cap on the number of non-family member employees. So again, the planning commission would have the discretion to do less than that number, but it would be bound as a cap. So they're looking at a cap of number of daily trips as a regulation and a cap of non-family member employees as a regulation. The last thing they were looking at is to consider clarifying what types of uses qualify as a home occupation. Jerry and I did discuss that item. I guess our recommendation would be actually not to go down that rabbit hole of what types of uses qualify, purely because it gets very, very messy very, very quickly. I use an example of when I was in Brainerd. The Brainerd ordinance used to say something like that, and we used to try to, if only these types of uses qualify as home occupations. The problem with that became a very messy ordinance to try to implement. And so in Brainerd, when we amended the city zoning code, we completely rewrote that section, purely because, again, it was just way too messy to try to go into these specific uses. And then you ran into issues where, for example, you would say, well, you can't have a forge, because we don't want metalworking, so no forges. Well, then that eliminates the person that's a one-man glass blowing shop, because they need a forge for their glass blowing operation. So we had issues like that. We did make it clear to the council, gave them the option that when they made this motion, that they could send it back here, amend it themselves, or have staff make their desired amendments and bring it back. Their decision was to send it back to the planning commission, have the planning commission make some amendments, send it back to the council. The council would then consider it in October and then also hold a new public hearing at that time. So with that, I think I'll take any comments or questions that the planning commission has on really those 2 main items, considering putting a cap on the daily number of trips. And I would say related to the business, and also maybe make that clarification as well, related to the business. People can come as much as they want to and from their home, but business-related trips, and then consider a cap on the number of non-family member employees.
Didn't we add the number of trips? Because in the old home, there wasn't anything, was there? It was just wide open, wasn't it?
Correct. And so I think the concern that the council had is how it's in here, it was in the purpose statement. So this isn't how it is right now. Home occupations are intended to generate less than 16 vehicle trips a day, including deliveries to employees. It's not, for them, they didn't feel like that was a binding clause, because technically it's just a purpose statement. It's not one of the actual regulations. Okay. And so they wanted it clear that if we're going to limit the number of trips, make it clear what the absolute max limit is. I think, what they were uncomfortable is one operation you might limit to 6, and another operation you might limit to 30.
I think we had a pretty lengthy discussion on that, because we were saying if you come off 11, it's a little different than if you come off a Dove or et cetera.
Which we did share to the council.
Okay.
Again, they just felt, they said their comment was they would feel more comfortable if there was a hard cap on trips. So pretty much the planning commission could authorize any number between X and 0.
I guess the feeling was, I think amongst the P and Z guys here was, or people, was if we were gonna do a interim, we would put a cap on the, you know, if it's coming off of Dove Street, like, it'd be 6. If it's coming off of County Road 11, it'd be 16, I think.
Yeah, and that's the council acknowledged, I know what they're
Right.
saying is they want a item, you know, in,
That says the max amount of trips can be
yeah.
16.
The max amount of trips can be 16, so the planning commission can't authorize anything more than 16. That's what they're looking for, is a absolute cap number that the planning commission cannot exceed for any reason.
I know we talked 20 and we put it down to 15 and figured 16, I can't remember, but I think it was 16 was the number.
How do you enforce it? Like, I have my general contractor's license, my wife's a real estate agent. I come home, get tools, whatever, she goes to show a house, comes back, that's 4 or 5 trips right there alone. I mean, we could make 16 easy in a day,
Yeah.
just ourselves. And then
Do you live on Dove Street or do you live on 11?
Dove Street, yeah.
Or whatever,
In that
yeah.
situation, I think the concern, there was less of a concern because it's your home, and you have the right to come and go from your home as much as you want.
Right.
It was more of the people that don't live at your property coming and
Right.
visiting your property.
Gotcha.
You know, if you have an office and you have 20 employees, are they all coming and
Right.
going from your
You're an
house?
architect
4
and you're
times
running
a-
your-
Yeah. What they don't want is non-fam people who do not live on the property coming and going constantly.
I understand now. That's a better clarification. And I think that should probably be put into the, if it's not already in the ordinance.
So I guess the question becomes, does the planning commission have a cap that you're comfortable with? Again, last time it was discussed, 16 was what was put in there. But then there was some discussion that happened at the planning commission meeting of, I think, difference in definitions of what a trip means. For myself, when I think trip, that's a round trip in, out. But then also at the discussion of the last meeting, that was 16 was 8 in, 8 out. So I think the 2 things we're looking for is there a max number that you would say you're comfortable with, or you think is appropriate? And then my request is that be the number of round trips, because that would be it's the easiest way to word it in ordinance would be a number of daily round trips.
So do you put 16 parentheses 2 or
I would
8 in and 8 out? I don't know.
I'd say 6,
Round trips.
If you want 8 in, 8 out, the number is 8. So we'd say 8 round trips. That's 8 in. A round trip is in and out. So we'd say 8 round trips, which is in
Round
and
trips,
out.
okay.
Yeah, round
Round
trips
trip
is how we
flight.
put it, yeah. So that's why I'm just asking for the clarification, whatever number you choose, that is clarified, that's a round trip, in and out. So if you choose 8, that's 8 in, 8 out. If you choose 20, it's 20 in, 20 out. And those are business-related visits by people who do not live on the property.
Did this come up because of one particular business
This,
or this ordinance? Or why are we reviewing it, or are we reviewing it for a specific reason? Were there complaints that someone has a business where there's 40 vehicles coming in at one time, or what?
think
I'm
it
just
was
trying to
a-
get the background on,
I think it was because of that guy that wanted to do it off a ranchette,
okay.
well,
wanted to build
there's
those.
been a number. So
Has
we've
there?
had a number
Okay.
of recent inquiries about home occupations of different types.
Right.
That under the current ordinance would not be allowed.
Okay.
I think it goes back further than just a recent request, actually. It goes back to the fact that the childcare facility, Ashtown, was proposing a home occupation for 24 or 28 persons. The planning commission approved that home occupation. It was appealed to the city council. The city council sided with the appellants, and the Ashtown permit was denied. after denial, the city council directed the planning commission to take a look at home occupations and how to deal with them better than what that instance was. I think that's what's prompted the initial discussions. Since then, we have had some other requests for home occupations, and they kind of filter together, but the start of the discussion started with the Ashdown proposal.
And also to clarify too, when the council did that, the direction wasn't look at home occupations to make sure that, to allow Ashdown to happen, was not the
Right.
direction. It was, we've had this discussion, other things have arisen from that discussion, mainly what is a home occupation and how are we viewing home occupations, and that's why we're
Starting here.
started looking at this ordinance and came up with the additional amendments and additions to the regulation. And I will add that the council did say they were all pretty unanimous that they really liked the addition of K. Looking at that, they liked the addition in F of adding traffic as a condition that the planning commission would take into account. It was really, again, it really came down to, they would like to see a hard cap on the number of trips and a cap on the number of non-family members being employed by a home occupation.
So non-family member, 1, 2, I mean, then it's actually a business if you're more than one employee, I think, but it's supposed to be a home, I don't know.
Again, with how it was proposed, they were just they were uncomfortable because they felt like it opened the possibility that a home occupation could be approved to have 10 employees.
All right.
And they didn't feel like that was necessarily an appropriate thing. So that's why they sent it back saying we want to see a hard cap on the number of non-family members.
David, could you scroll up just a little bit so I can see that bold writing?
Go this way.
Yep.
And then the other one being the hard cap on number of trips.
Is my understanding, David, that we need to make a decision on this or make a recommendation on this tonight so they can deal with it in October?
The council would like to
Okay.
reassess it in October.
So in the case of Ashdown, obviously you have parents dropping off kids. They're not employees, is that a delivery?
That would consider a number of trips though. So, and I will clarify, with Ashdown as it is right now, they don't fall under home occupation. They fall under the section that talks about state statute of daycares. So Ashdown does not, this section does not affect Ashdown
Okay.
today. It would be more of some of the other inquiries, like we had Mr. Thayer's inquiry to do his manufacturing operation, very small manufacturing off of Bushman. That would be saying, in his situation, as he came and presented to you, I think is that in August or July? July. It's him and his brother-in-law. And that's it. The ordinance as it's currently written would not allow that because his brother-in-law is not a family member who lives on the premises.
Gotcha.
Brother.
And I'm sure they get deliveries if they're manufacturing.
Well, I would say in this situation, they might.
Right.
But
So that
it's kind of irregardless, it came down to more of, again, what the council is looking for is cap the number of non-family member employees that don't live on the premises. So how many people are coming to the property daily, and then the number of trips, be that deliveries, customers, employees, et cetera.
Well, like I said, I don't think you should have more than two. Then it's a business, it's not a home. Then you need to go get into a commercial zone, right?
More than two non-family,
Right.
okay.
One or two? Is that too few, too many?
Two was a number that I know at least one or two council members threw out there. They didn't, when the council issued that, they didn't necessarily say there was a specific number they were looking for. I think what I heard from them, Tom would probably hopefully share the same thing if he was here, is that I think they were looking for to be a smaller number.
Of trips.
Well, I was talking about first about employees, a
Okay,
smaller
employees.
number of employees, and then I would say as a result, it would result in a smaller number of trips as well.
Are you making that a motion, Roger, too?
It was a thought, I don't know. It's-
My recommendation was figure out what you're comfortable with
Right.
both, and then just do it all in one one motion.
What do you guys?
I'm
well,
comfortable with two
Non-family members.
non-family
okay,
members.
Yeah,
But then, how many trips?
well, I was just thinking, not that it's the same thing, but you allow 14 kids at a daycare, you could have 14 cars coming in with kids and
So that's
14.
28 trips.
Yeah. So it's a different animal, I know that, but 8 round trips doesn't seem like a lot, but it's,
So you'd have a minimum of with two
right,
employees, it's a minimum of 2. And if you thought if it's, and depending on deliveries, say you get one a day, that's 3. If you have customers,
the numbers we saw from Pequot, was it, correct, they had 25, I think, on some of their zones.
It depended upon the zone that they were located on.
Right.
And what type of home occupation they had.
Right.
They had type 1, type 2, and type 3.
I remember that there was.
and then again, the planning commission in this situation, no matter what number you set it at, when you are doing your review of a home occupation, again, you can take into account, okay, what is the street, what is the neighborhood, and give them less than that number. It's just you can't give them, if you set the number at, say, 10, you could say, well, you get 5 because of X, Y, and Z, but you can't give them more than 10.
Right, round
Max.
trip.
Yeah. But you could always restrict it to less.
But do we have to figure out where those restrictions are?
And that's what you would do on a case-by-case basis. You would say, taking into account things like, nuisance problems, noise, vibration, smoke, dust, fumes, and then all of these issues as well. What's the layout of the street? Is it is there one inlet? There's only one way in and out of the neighborhood. Is it densely populated? All those things you could take into account. Because of all these things, we're going to say, you can have your 2 employees, but then you only can have 4 trips a day.
Right.
You could say those, you could determine that.
Jerry, when we approved that wine-making place up off of
Dove in
Ranch
Belgium.
Dove or whatever, I don't think we had any trip.
There was nothing in the ordinance at that time that addressed trips.
Right.
So even if we said 4 trips, the
That's,
employee comes to work, he leaves at noon for lunch,
that,
comes back, that's basically 2 round trips, then he leaves, he's already at 3, so if you have 2, 6, I mean, depending on how we read
so you
this.
need a higher number.
Right,
Yeah,
and then if they're gonna get deliveries throughout the week or the day, it's per day though.
right.
This is per day.
I don't know, 10 round trips would be out of it's higher than what we had, but like you said, with 2 employees, you already have 6 trips or whatever.
Right.
Of course, who enforces it? Jerry stands there with a clicker or what?
Right.
Probably.
If you got
Probably
it.
not. Actually, I think it's probably going to be like anything else. If in fact it's in a
Somebody
residential
complains.
neighborhood and it's being abused, we will find out about it very quickly.
Right.
I feel comfortable with 2 non-family member employees and 10 vehicle trips, round trips per day.
I agree.
I agree. Round trips,
Round trips.
Seems fair.
I motion
max.
for 2 non-employees, 10 round trips max per day, subject to where you live or where that home occupation is.
Right.
I'll second that if that's a motion.
Yes, it was a motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
What
Motion's
about
passed.
you, Lee?
Aye.
Oh. Do we have open forum yet, or?
Not yet.
Okay, do we have any, we go to public input?
I think we forgot an open forum on
The open forum was
This-
at the beginning.
we usually have 2.
Oh, okay.
Did we not, Jerry?
Our new administrator suggested that we,
If you want to have a
without
second one,
two.
you can have a second one. It is up to you.
Okay, okay.
Normal protocol would only be to have one, but if you,
Gotcha.
but it is up to the commission. If
Okay.
you want to have a second one,
It's up to you.
you may have, it is
I'm-
at the
I'm in favor it.
discretion of the
If someone
chair.
needs to speak, then
if,
this is
if
their
you're,
time.
if you're interested, there is a gentleman that's chomping at the bit to
That's what I,
jump up in front of the microphone.
That's
I
what
would
I-
say, Lee, as the chair, it
That's
is
what
your-
I
it is
thought.
your discretion.
he didn't come here for the coffee, I didn't figure.
You have anybody, questions, come on up. State your name and address, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Jeff Johnson, representing White Birch, Breezy Point Resort. Just a couple of things on the short-term rentals. I understand during the break I talked to Jerry on a couple of things. One of the questions that came up was the Breezy Point Resort rental units would not be subjected to the short-term rental through the county licensing and the city licensing. But what about the units, again, that perhaps Mr. Doty owned that rented through us, that we managed for him and did a rental split on the money earned there, so forth and so on? Would he have to have that license, even though he's already licensed with the state of Minnesota also? We also are subjected to licensing by the state and water samples for all of our rental units. That's one question. The second question, you were talking about licensing for those short-term rentals. And again, I apologize for not coming in, not being here when this was brought up before, but has any discussion been thought about using the Department of Health? Because they do require licenses for all of our units that we rent and/or timeshare. And that, while that may not get the city a fee, it would take care of the licensing part of it so that the Department of Health would have to inspect it at least once a year. And the water would have to be sampled at least once a year. If they were required to have the state license, you could require the owner to get that to you, and so that you knew that they were licensed. They can furnish you with a copy of that license. They get a copy of it as well. So those were kind of the high points that I thought of as that discussion was going on. But it seems to me the Department of Health is already here. Why not use it to the city's advantage? So, thank you.
I'm going to try and answer some of Jeff's concerns. Most of the devil's in the details. The ordinance has already been passed. The only thing that this organization or this group of folks was supposed to address was the where. I think when it comes to the enforcement part of it, it's a council and a staff decision, and it really doesn't bother these people or these people don't get involved in that type of thing. The ordinance is there today. There are some exemptions for the resort. I would be happy to supply you with a copy of that ordinance that the council passed. And from there, I think maybe you can, come in and give us some questions as staff, and we'll certainly get the answers for you. But I don't know that this group of folks needs to get involved in that at this point.
I'll just add to Jerry's comments. Yeah, Jeff, anytime Jerry and I, we can absolutely talk about, especially the resort-specific actually had some of those questions. We actually have run them to the city attorney, so we can absolutely, especially offline here after this meeting, if you want to chat, we can do so. The other thing I will just add too, I think with the licensing ordinance, again, it's been adopted for the council goes into effect on January 1st. Until we start doing it, we don't know if there are holes in the ordinance or things like that. So, a year down the line, we might see that areas where that ordinance may need amendment. And so, Mr. Johnson's comments, maybe Department of Health, I know that's areas where, when I was in Brainerd, that was part of their ordinance. You have a license to Department of Health. Granted, that's really kind of between the property owner and the state. Whether we require it or not is irregardless if the state requires it. The state might still require it. I'm not sure. That's between the property owner and the state. So again, I could foresee after the ordinance goes into effect in January, we take the first year, see how it goes, and then if we see that there are holes, we would, as staff, absolutely make recommendations that the ordinance be amended to fix things as it goes. But until we start really, it gets implemented and we start doing it, we won't really know if there are holes in the ordinance or not, and what those holes might be.
Well, the county already found there's holes that need to be.
And that's with any ordinance. I think even on the zoning side, we see that these are living documents and living things, and when holes arise, we can't anticipate everything, and when those issues come up, that's where as staff we do our best to try to identify those and then bring them forward for that discussion of how we should amend it to kind of fill those gaps. Now, unfortunately, there will always be people who will find the way around ordinances. Doesn't matter how intricate you try to make it, how clear you try to make it, and tight you try to make it. There'll always be those that try to find their way around it, and then as those holes show them, kind of rear their head, we try to plug them.
Does when they get a license, does the county require a water test?
They currently do not, and actually that was one of the comments that the council made as part of their comments, is that they encouraged the county to put that into their ordinance.
Isn't that in ours?
It is in ours. So the water test is in our ordinance. It's not in the county's, but as I said, in the council's letter to the county, they encouraged the county to add that to their ordinance as well.
If you're on well, even city?
If you're in the city, I think the clarification, if you're on a well. If you are on a private well, then to have it tested. Obviously, if you're in the city of Brainerd or in the city of Baxter, they provide city water. That's the MPCA. Right. They have all those other regulations. So
It's all wells here.
it's all wells here. So that's why in the city's ordinance we required the testing.
One more quick thing, I promise to be quick.
No, go ahead.
Jeff, can you go to the mic for me? Thank you.
Jeff Johnson, representing White Birch again. Just wanted to mention the Department of Health is changing their policies, and one of those is they're going to start tracking manganese. This city has a lot of manganese in the water table, and that is proven to them apparently to have some health concerns, and so they will be tracking that. And so if the city is going to be getting and collecting water permits, you may want to make sure you track some of those items similarly to what the state is doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Go ahead.
No, I'll try to make it quick. Getting back to what Roger had said earlier, most people that I have talked to have no idea that the short-term rental thing is going on. I challenge any of you to ask, you know, the store clerk or wherever, and most people have no idea this is happening right now. They either don't see it in the paper or it just doesn't come up. They have no idea, and I've been asking people over and over, and an example, I have no answer. I mean, unfortunately, I don't have the answer to this, and it's unfortunate. But remember back when there was the survey, take the survey for the community center. I made it, and it was out it was wonderfully signed at every county road coming into Breezy Point. And every time I would walk into the corner store, I would say, hey, what do you guys think about that community? And they'd say, what community center? Every time. I mean, you know, there's no excuse for that, but that was my own personal, you know, findings. But I'm telling you, with this short-term rental, most people do not know, in Breezy Point, do not know this is happening right now. They just don't.
If I wasn't on the P and Z, I probably wouldn't know, you know. Nobody buys papers, so.
And like I said, I don't have an answer for it, but that was my personal experience lately. Whenever I ask somebody, they're like, what are you talking about? And I try to inform them.
And if you're correct, and I think you are, they certainly don't know that they can complain or how to complain.
If they need to.
Well, and getting back to, there seems to be much more emphasis on, you know, where they are and blah, blah, blah. And I'm telling you, it's the amount of people. There's been more talk at these last few meetings about what's the impact of these small home businesses on the community? What's the impact of this daycare on the local residential community? How come there's no talk? What is going to be the impact of these short-term rentals on these neighborhoods? And talk about trips in and out, and talk about people. And, you know, like I said before, I don't know if you had ever heard my story, but I hate to keep going on and on about this. When we first moved up here 20-some years ago, we were next door to a Breezy Point resort rental. And it was like living next to a frat house. It was like parties at 2 o'clock in the morning. I got sick of getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning. And sure, there's a hotline, call the hotline, but now I've got a job. Now you've given me a job to get up and do. You'll have to excuse me, I get really nervous with public speaking.
It's okay.
And so we were averaging how many people, so then I had it on this side. Then they came up, moved up here, the owners. Then I got it on this side. So I was right in the middle of 2 possible rentals. Now you start estimating how many people per week, how many weeks of the summer or the year, and then double that. And now I've got that many strangers. I'm glad I don't have small children. If I had small children, I'd be real concerned to have that many strangers surrounding me all the time. And so I think it's more so the number of people that you're gonna be looking at.
Thank you.
Hundreds, there would be hundreds in the summer. Believe that I don't have to come up here and speak.
So,
Anybody else, any concerns?
I think time to adjourn.
I guess we can adjourn this evening's meeting. Thank you, everybody.